Hello, I'm Irma Baker. Welcome to our show. We're sponsored by RSVP, the Retired Senior Volunteer Program, which is a part of Mature Services serving Medina and Summit counties. Welcome to our show today, and I have a question for you. Did you ever think, oh, I'd love to write a book? Well, our guest today is an author who has made that journey from wanting to actually becoming a writer. And we'll meet her right after these words from our sponsor.
RSVP of Summit County has been making a difference in our community since 1972. RSVP volunteers are increasing the quality of life by participating in programs and organizations that provide important services to the community. RSVP matches personal interests and skills with opportunities to serve. If you're interested in adding more meaning to your life and improving the lives of others, please call 330-253-4597, extension 166.
Welcome back. Our guest today is Amanda Ewell, and she is a new author here in our Northeast Ohio area. And welcome, Amanda. It's so great to have you with us today.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
It is a fascinating journey that I think many people will be able to identify with that journey if they've wanted to write a book. And here you are, someone who went from wanting to do it, wishing to do it, to actually doing it. I want to tell our audience about the 2 books you have out. I mean, you went from no books to 2 books within a space of less than a year. Your first one being Mind Waves, which is a technological romantic thriller, I guess is the way I describe it. And then your most recent one, romance book called Charmed by Charlie. So, Amanda, tell us, please, how did you make this journey?
Well, it's a long journey. It didn't happen overnight. And honestly, I never really thought about writing when I was younger as a career. I actually thought about that much later in life. After I got out of college, I went to Kent State University and I graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Theater. And what I learned from that experience is that I enjoyed telling a story, but I really didn't enjoy being the person on the stage telling a story. I liked kind of being behind the scenes. And so after I graduated, I needed to find a job in the real world. And so I got a job as an advertising assistant at a hardware company. And that gave me the first real taste of writing in the corporate world, because I had to work on a lot of campaigns. I got to do photography shoots, put together brochures, and I discovered that I had a knack for not just the writing, but the presentation of information. And so then I started to really seriously think about writing, and that this was a talent that I had. And so I then looked for a job as a writer. And I found a job as a communications writer at a major corporation in the Cleveland area. And that sort of launched my second phase of a career. And I'm still doing that work today. I work in a cybersecurity department at a major company. I manage all of their training and communications. And I've really excelled in the workplace. But the funny thing is, I always had this desire inside for years and years to do something more, something a bit more creative. And I think for me, I lacked confidence. I didn't know if I could actually write a whole book and finish it.
Well, let me ask you something. You talked about, you just mentioned now the lack of confidence. I'm wondering how your family background has worked into this, because you come from a very large family. Did you ever actually feel you were lost in the family?
Yeah, so I come from a family of 15. I have 14 siblings. And I grew up out in the country. My parents had about 8 acres. My mom and dad are still living. My father is 91, my mother is 89. And my mother did not drive, so I had a lot of free time on my hands growing up. And I spent a lot of time reading. That's where I really discovered my love of reading. I would say my first passion in life was reading. Writing has come later. And when you have a lot of time on your hands like that, reading is really an escape, a way to experience the world in a way you might not get to, you know, if you can't travel or see the world physically. So my experience of growing up in a big family and having all that time on my hands really, I think, did establish that love of reading and later kind of writing books.
Well, there's also a rumor, isn't there, that your family home was haunted?
Yeah, so the house that I grew up in, it was 100 years old when I was born, and so I think now it's listed on the National Register of Historic Places, so it's very old house. And there's lots of ghost stories that were told in that house, and so I like to think of it when I go to write a book. I'm a lot of times I go back in my mind to growing up in that old house because there was just a lot of mystery surrounding it. There were a lot of old rooms, and we would find treasures, and it was just a really unique and neat place to grow up. And I was actually born in the house, in one of the bedrooms in the house. So I think that's kind of interesting too. Not many people can bring somebody back to the spot that they were born. So.
That's a fascinating background, and it's very different from what most people have, most of us who grew up in the city or born in a hospital or that. But how do you feel that life experiences fit into the creation of the book and the actual writing of the book?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I like to talk about the house that I grew up in because of the mystery and the ghost stories, because I've always had a fascination with the paranormal. And so when and I guess with my first book, which is Mind Waves, several things came together for that book. One is the paranormal and my fascination with, you know, mysterious things. A second would be the fact that I work in a cybersecurity department. So Mind Waves is the first book in the Mind Hacker series, and the story follows characters who can hack into minds, and they work for the government, and they can erase thoughts or change thoughts, and they guard the nation's intellectual property. So I think I drew on a lot of my day job working in cybersecurity. And then there's a third element, and that is Lake Erie beach glass. And something that I enjoy doing with my family is collecting beach glass on the shores of Lake Erie. And so in the story, the main character is a mosaic artist, and she uses beach glass in her designs. And that's really where the spark for Mind Waves came from, because I was out on the shore one day gathering beach glass, and I started to get a little nervous because you can be by yourself for a long period of time. And I started to worry that maybe somebody was watching me. And as I was thinking about that, my mind started to go places, as it will do. And I started to think, what if somebody were watching you and they could read your mind and you had no idea? And then I really got carried away, and I started thinking, what if somebody were watching you and they could read your mind and they fell in love with you and you had no idea? What would happen next? And that's the spark that created that book.
That sounds so much like the idea of what if, that a writer works in the world of what if. Do you think that that has influenced you?
I think so. You know, people ask me a lot, where do you come up with your ideas? And the way I answer that is I'm a very intuitive writer. I don't think a lot ahead of time. I don't plot out. I know some writers plot. I would not call myself a plotter, although plotting is important to the writing process, as I've learned through the process of writing 2 books. But I really think that for me, it's somewhere in my intuition, some part of my brain that is always wondering about things and thinking about things. And I find it fascinating as a writer how you bring experiences in your life, come out in your books, and you have no idea. I really don't know until I finish the book, and then I realize, oh, well, I wrote about this because of this experience in my life. So for instance, with Charmed by Charlie, my newest book, I used to work for, one of my first job out of school I mentioned was an advertising department at a smaller company. I based the company, Reynolds Paint Company, that's featured in this book, in the office environment off of that first job. So, and I didn't know I was doing that until I finished the book.
Really building on what you have inside of you.
I think so, yeah. And I think it's a real intuitive kind of process that you go through as a writer.
Well, I find the storyline of mind waves, that's pretty scary in terms of mind hacking, of people actually being able to read your mind and do something, get in there and do something. And yet, this isn't necessarily a scary book, it's also a romance.
Yeah, it is interesting. What is interesting about Mind Waves is it crosses genres. It is considered a paranormal romance novel. However, it's filled with romantic suspense. There's a mystery to solve. And it's also set in contemporary times. So many people, many of the readers have approached me after reading the book and have said, you know, is this really true? Does the government really have a cognitive mind unit? And no, the government, as far as I know, does not have a cognitive mind unit, but it sounds believable because it's set in contemporary times. So, so it's really a mix of really 3 different genres, and that's unique, I think.
Well, it makes it appealing to a wide variety of readers because you can read it for whatever genre is your favorite. One of the things, too, that I hear a lot from people who want to write is that they should join an organization that will promote that. Have you involved yourself in any organizations promoting writing?
Yeah, so that's a good question. After I finished writing Mind Waves, I wasn't even sure I could write a book, so I just started writing the story, and it took me about 9 months to write the book from beginning to end. And when I finished, I really didn't know what to do. So lucky for me, I had became aware of an organization called the Northeast Ohio Romance Writers Association, or NEORWA, and that's affiliated with the national organization, the Romance Writers of America. So I joined the group in April of 2015, I believe it was, and it just so happened that their conference, their annual conference, was the next month, and there would be editors and agents at that conference. So joining that group was invaluable to me in my journey, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to write a book, to find a good writing organization to belong to. Because I joined that group, I was able to pitch my first editor in May, a month after I had completed the book.
Okay, I have to stop you right there, because you're using terms now that may not be familiar to all of us when you say pitch your editor. What are you talking about?
Yeah, okay, so pitching an editor. So when you write a book, you can choose to self-publish the book, and you would not have to pitch an editor in that instance. And self-publishing means just what it sounds like. You publish the book yourself using tools that exist from Amazon or other organizations. But I chose a different path. I chose to sign a contract with the publisher. So when I say pitch a book, I had to actually write a query letter, which is basically a letter to the publisher, to an editor with the publisher, saying what the book is about, who I am, my background, and basically you're giving the hook of your book to an editor in the hopes that they'll say, yes, we would like to publish it and offer you a contract. And so that's what I did when I say that I pitched my first editor. I basically sat down with an editor. I was lucky to be able to do that because of this group I had joined at their May conference, and that editor that I talked about the book with and asked them if they would want the manuscript, that's the editor that I eventually signed Mind Waves with. It took almost 12 months though. And that's, for anybody listening to this, the message that I would have is that it's not an easy process, but it's a necessary process, because what happens is that you continually refine your work and you make it better. as you go through this process of trying to understand what it is that the editor or the publisher wants. You know, I had written for years in the corporate world, so I was not new to writing, but it's a whole different process to go and write a work of fiction. It has to be written in a certain way. There are certain guidelines and rules and things that you need to know. And so I learned them by pitching the editor coming back to me and saying, no, this isn't quite right. And I like to liken it, the example I use is it's like making a recipe and not having instructions to follow. So you put your ingredients together, you mix it up, you put it in the oven, and it comes out, and people are like, ooh, that doesn't look so hot, it doesn't smell good, it doesn't taste good. And so you really don't have any end in sight. You just continually refine and try to make it better. You put it back into the oven, and then one day, when it comes out of the oven, people start to take notice, and they say, well, that actually smells pretty good. Let me try a taste. And then they taste it and they say, you know, that's really good. I want that recipe. And that's what happened to me over the course of the 12 months. By the time I got to the end of the process, I got actually 7 contract offers for Mind Waves. And this is interesting as well, I got an 8th contract offer after I had already signed the contract with the press. It's the Wild Rose Press, is the press that I signed with for Mind Waves. The 8th offer came in after that, and they are the publisher of Charmed by Charlie, because what happened is they said, you know, I had to tell them this book is taken, and they said, is there anything else? And I was lucky because I had started to write something totally new, and I was able to show them a couple chapters, and they signed the 2nd book.
Well, that is really a high compliment for a brand new author, because at that time, Mind Waves wasn't even published. You had just signed the contract. True. But for another publishing company to come to you and say, oh, darn, we missed out on that one. What else can you give us?
Yeah, that was very exciting for me to get that 2nd offer, because it had taken almost 12 months the first time around. So I was expecting that. I wasn't, you know, my mindset was I was thinking, oh, it's going to take another 12 months to get the 2nd one published. And so when it happened so quickly, and I hadn't even finished the book, I'd only written a few chapters, then the pressure was on to write the book and finish it. And I did that pretty quickly. And so we now have 2 very different books, still romance, both share, you know, romance, but they're very different novels.
I think that's an important point, too, that the genres today in fiction, they really are very broad. You don't necessarily, a romance is not a romance, a romance, a romance. You have all these different variations, and that goes, I think, with whatever genre you're writing, whether it's mystery or romance or historical fiction or whatever it may be. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, so what's interesting about romance, and a lot of people don't know this, is that what makes a romance is it has to have the happily ever after. And so that's what both of these books share. They both have a happy ending. If it doesn't have the happily ever after, then it's a different genre. It might be women's fiction, it might be mystery, you know, it could be a different genre altogether. So I think that's what makes romance unique, and I really enjoy the happily ever after. For me, that's what I like to read. I like a happy ending. I think romance readers, you know, life is stressful at times, and they're reading for an escape, and so it's great to have that kind of ending.
Well, that brings up something else. If you have a happily ever after ending, how do you move on from there? But you said that Mind Waves is the first in the Mind Hackers series. So how do you go on from there?
So just because you have a happily ever after for the 2 main characters in your first book doesn't mean you can't pull other characters from that novel and bring them forth into a 2nd book in the series. And with Mind Waves, I have 4 books planned. Mind Waves is the first book in the series. I have taken 2 characters from the first book, and I pulled them into the 2nd book, and now I'm telling their story. And that book is called Cross Waves. Hopefully that will be out later this year. And then I will again pull a character then from the second book into the third story, and then that will be called Dream Waves. And the very last book in the series will be called Love Waves. And my plan is to go back and pull a character from the very first book so that I bring it full circle. And so in that way you can very easily extend out a series and have it make sense to the reader. And I think the reader really enjoys it because now they can kind of follow the saga of these people with these unique abilities in the story.
Well, that really brings to mind something you said a little earlier, that you're not a plotter in terms of plotting everything out. And yet you do have a strategy. Do you think that goes back to your marketing experience?
You know, that's a great question. I honestly, I don't know why I did it the way I did it. You know, I really didn't think through it all. It sounds like I thought it through. And I did think of titles, and I did think about doing a series. I think I was advised to do a series by another author early on, maybe from the group that I had joined. And so I started to think about it. Readers enjoy series. So I do have an idea in my mind when I go to write of where I want the novel to go. So I know kind of who the characters are or what the major conflict is, and I know how I want it to end. But what I don't plot out is all the stuff in between. Now, I will tell you my process was very different for these two books. The first book, I didn't know if I could write a book. So when I started writing, I had to kind of give myself permission to write the book. And what I mean by that is I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So I had to not tell anybody I was writing that book. And I just, you know, spent time writing it. And when I finished it, that's when I realized, wow, I'm capable of writing a book. And then I had to go through the next part of the process, which is, would anybody be interested in reading this book? Is it any good? And what I learned through the process of publishing Mind Waves is that, yes, people would read the book. There's a story there, but I needed to perfect the writing. And so that was that long period of time that I did that. Now, with Charmed by Charlie, what's very fascinating with this book is it's a character-driven novel, which means I thought up the characters first. And I plotted out, I did plot, because I know that plotting is important. I plotted out the characters' goals, motivations, and conflicts. So I thought through that for each character.
When you say you did that, did you actually write it down, or was that something that you just had in the back of your mind?
No, I actually wrote it down. It was very difficult for me to do because, as I said, I'm not a plotter. But I have taken some courses, and I've learned a few things since I started this writing process, that this is a good exercise to think about, because just like in real life, people have goals and motivations and conflicts, and the key to writing a really good novel that people will want to read is thinking through what are they and making sure they're strong enough that when you bring the characters together, they will clash and things will happen magically. And that's really what happened with this book. This second book wrote itself pretty much because I thought through those characters, and then when I put them in the scenes, I kind of had that vague idea of where I wanted the book to go. They just wrote themselves.
Do you feel that your characters came alive and were in some ways directing you even in directions maybe you hadn't intended to go?
I think so, yes. For me, the characters in Charmed by Charlie were gripping. I still don't want to let them go, and I need to, because I need to move back into the paranormal world to get the series done. But I will say that the characters seemed very real to me, like people that I've known, and so yes, you know, it was really a unique experience writing that book, and a lot of fun for me personally.
Well, I want to make sure that people know how they can get your books, because these are not books that, you know, you can't just walk into Barnes & Noble or Books A Million or that and pick them up. This is a whole new, you know, pun intended on your title, it's a whole new wave of publishing. You are published by a traditional publisher, Wild Rose Press, and the press then that's doing Charlie, but at the same time it's not one of those huge names that you find on every other book in Barnes & Noble. So how do people get your books?
Yeah, so you can find these books anywhere online that you can purchase any other book. So Amazon, iTunes, iBooks, you know, all of the different online publishers. Where you're not going to find the book is in bookstores, because I'm with a smaller press that doesn't have a distribution arm like the bigger presses would. So unless I place the book in a bookstore, a particular bookstore, you wouldn't find them online. I do always have copies with me, and I am planning to do several book launch parties that are open to the public. I'm going to have one on April 29th in Hartville from 1 to 4, and anybody is welcome to come to that. It's going to be at the Front Porch Cafe in Hartville. And I will have another one on May 21st up in Lakewood at the Salvaged Boutique on Madison Avenue. So if anybody would like to come to those, the one in Lakewood is May 21st from 2 to 5.
And you do have a website, don't you, where people can link to this information in case they don't remember where to get it?
Absolutely, amandayule.com, yes.
Well, Amanda, it has been a pleasure having you with us. All the future success, and thank you so much. And I hope that any of you who may feel like you want to write a book, that this has been helpful to you. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and have a wonderful day.
Since 1971, RSVP has been matching volunteers' talents to community needs. RSVP is affiliated with the Corporation for National and Community Service, a national organization that supports service and volunteering through grant-funded projects. Volunteers organize neighborhood watch programs, tutor children, renovate homes, plant community gardens, assist victims of natural disasters, and serve their communities in many other ways. RSVP offers maximum flexibility and choice to its volunteers as it matches the personal interests and skills of Americans 55 and older with opportunities to serve their communities. If you're interested in adding more meaning to your life and improving the lives of others, please call 330-253-4597 extension 166.